Zakaria made a video on recent US strikes on Iran, and it's filled with inaccuracy. So I wanted to react to it. And before anyone says anything, I love Fareed and I have learned a lot from his videos. In fact, that's how I saw this video. I watch all his videos. So let's watch it together.
Here's my take. The debate about the military effectiveness of America's airstrikes against Iran misses a more profound point. Brilliant battlefield success by itself will not ensure a nuclear-free Iran. The U.S. attacks capped a year-plus-long Israeli campaign that utterly exposed that Iran's axis of resistance was a paper tiger. My own guess is that the American strikes were highly effective. Uranium enrichment facilities rely on elaborate machinery, steady power supply, and structurally sturdy environments. All that is likely to have been compromised by the 14 bunker buster bombs that landed at precise targets. But even assuming the damage was severe, most experts I've spoken to estimate that the strikes would have set back Iran's nuclear program by 1 to 2 years.
Now, this is where the first half truth, I guess. It is true. A lot of the experts, these are experts from IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. That's the agency that was monitoring the Iranian nuclear program. And they have said that Iran could probably rebuild their program in 1 to 2 years and that's a big if they have the centrifuges, it's somewhere stored, some extra centrifuges, and if they have the uranium, enriched uranium. Now, we know they have the enriched uranium, but that if is still a big part, if they have the centrifuges. That's like saying the same thing that I can build a nuclear program in 1 to 2 years if I have the knowledge on how to do it and if I have the centrifuges. The if is doing the heavy lifting, and the way he just said it, it's just glossed over that big assumption that all the experts point out specifically, because I know what he's talking about. And another part that's important to keep in mind, because it will play a role in the future, is see how here he's believing the experts, but just later in the video, he completely forgets to listen to the experts. Like when the experts support the argument he's trying to make in this video, he's happy to cite the same experts from the same agency, IAEA. But when they don't support the argument, he just ignores them completely. So this is where it's important to remember that he just pointed out experts right now, because in 30 seconds, he's not going to do it.
By contrast, the Iran nuclear deal, finalized in 2015, placed Iran's nuclear program in check for 10 to 15 years. The Israeli attacks might...
Now, okay, let's talk. This was in 10 seconds. I said 30 seconds, so I misremembered. But the deal we signed under President Obama was definitely better than nothing, but it wasn't a perfect deal by any sense of the imagination. So let's go over the main points of the deal. I have some rough notes. Now, this is not everything, but the main thing in the deal was the enrichment. Iran could not enrich over 4% uranium for 15 years. It wasn't a permanent solution. It was like a band-aid for a problem that was a big problem for the world. It wasn't like, hey, you cannot enrich it. In fact, we are telling them, hey, you can have the centrifuges, you can have all this. Only thing you cannot do is don't spin the centrifuges too much so you enrich it to nuclear weapon. Because if you guys don't know, the only difference between 4% uranium and 90% uranium is how much you're spinning the centrifuges. Of course, it takes a lot longer to get to 90% than it takes to get to 4%, but still, that's the only difference. You don't need anything extra to enrich more uranium. You just need to spin it more, or maybe more centrifuges, so you can cut the time down. So that was one of the big requirements, and that was already a big issue, because this is not a permanent solution. This is just a 15-year band-aid on this problem of Iran trying to get nuclear weapons. And all this time, Iran got a lot of money for signing this deal. They also got sanctions lifted, so that means they can stack up money for future if they wanted to build a nuclear bomb. Now, the second big problem, and that was quite possibly the bigger problem, is IAEA agents. So basically, International Atomic Energy Agency's agents had complete access to Iranian sites that we knew about. So the sites we know about, and this included all the sites we have talked about: Fordo, Natanz, Esfahan, Arak, any other you can think that we have talked about in the last few weeks. It includes all these sites. So they can use cameras to monitor them, they can visit them, anything like that. But if the agents ever found any secret sites, they could not just go and visit it. They could not just go see if Iran is building a bomb at that site. What they had to do is request permission to visit that site, and Iran had 14 days to say yes or no. And after that, it would go to a whole different countries who had 7 days to decide. Then Iran had to do it in 3 days. So in total, by the time when agents ask, hey, can we see this secret site where you're building nuclear centrifuges or nuclear facility, Iran had roughly 21 days, so 3 weeks before they had to like show that site to agents. That was a huge problem, because think about it. If I'm Iran, let's just assume I'm building a nuclear facility to enrich uranium to build nuclear bombs. If you guys find out about it, you're the agents, and you have to wait 21 days, I'll just clean up the sites before you come see it, right? I'll just hide all the evidence. Now, the craziest part of all this actually happened. The agents found multiple, like 4 or 5 secret sites, and Iran didn't even take 21 days to give them access. In fact, they took months to give them access. Now, of course, we don't have evidence that Iran was doing something wrong, but it's like they have something secret and they're not letting us see what's inside there. I think we all can assume like what's going on in there. So that was the big issue with the deal, with the nuclear deal that we signed. Again, definitely better than nothing. We did have like roughly a 15-year ban on enrichment, but they were probably doing something that was not supposed to be done. Like they did something, they promised to not do something, and they're probably doing it, and that's why the deal was problematic. So we needed something better. So that's like the big point he just didn't mention. He just glossed over it so quickly.
Actually have done more to delay Iran's nuclear program than the bunker buster bombs. In less than 2 weeks, Israel killed at least 14 of Iran's top nuclear.
Israel did do a lot too, but then again, US targeted one of the sites Israel couldn't target. So all of Israel's efforts would be for nothing if it wasn't for the bunker busters. So that's like important.
14 of Iran's top nuclear scientists, even more high-ranking military officials, and destroyed around half of all its missile launchers, according to Benjamin Netanyahu. Iran's air defenses are close to neutralized, which means it is now vulnerable to an Israeli or American strike at any time. But as the head of the International Atomic...
See, again, he quotes him, but then he completely ignores him for other stuff. That was like my big issue with the problem, because I'm following this a lot, and like I don't have a physics PhD or anything, but I feel like I studied physics a lot in the last 2 weeks. So it was frustrating to see this, where like he's quoting the agency in some points, but he's not quoting them on other points, and it's like pretty exactly lines up to, if they're supporting his argument, he'll quote them. If they're not, he's not.
Energy Agency, Rafael Mariano Grossi, pointed out, Iran has the know-how to rebuild. It appears to have moved large quantities of enriched uranium that, if intact, could easily be weaponized. That uranium cannot be bombed without potentially causing massive casualties, which means that the only way to ensure that Iran will not be a nuclear weapon state would be through negotiations and inspections. In other words, by signing another Iran nuclear deal. Sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword.
Okay, so important point. We had a 60-day window to negotiate with Iran, and Iran was the one who was not trying to get a nuclear deal. They didn't want to negotiate. Trump presented a lot of options that he's going to talk about in just a second, but Iran just kept saying no. No intentions of giving up enrichment like control to other countries, because there was one option that he's going to talk about in just a second where, hey, other countries can enrich inside Iran and they'll give you uranium. But Iran was like, no. So and on top of that, Trump's, again, even after the strikes, Trump's saying, hey, we want a nuclear deal. Trump understands that's the long-term solution. But it was Iran who was being problematic. So that's why we went in. That was like the reason why the strikes happened. It wasn't just like, oh, US wanted to show off the B-2s. Again, we've had the bunker busters since like 2013. So if we really did want to show off, we could have showed off a lot earlier.
For all his bluster about the American strikes, Donald Trump seems to understand this, and he is now calling for diplomacy.
April 12th, negotiations started. There was a 60-day timer. Nothing happened till June 12th. The Israeli operation started on June 13th. Then the US went in 2-3 weeks after that. Maybe I'm misremembering the last part, but all the rest is correct. You can double check me on that.
Position. He has the political capital in America and Israel to make a deal. Iran can and should be asked to do more than was asked by the Obama administration in 2015. The Islamic Republic is in a much weaker position than it was then. In fact, than it's been in decades. The demands should include real curbs on a nuclear program that currently provides only about 2% of Iran's electricity.
So that's another part no one talks about. Iran's whole defense is like, oh, they need this uranium enrichment for nuclear reactors. But they don't use the uranium they enrich for nuclear reactors. First of all, you don't need to enrich to 60%. Now, another part that I learned recently is it takes a hell of a lot longer to go from 0 to like 20%. It takes like months, maybe years, depending on how many centrifuges you have. It's a lot faster to go from like 20 to 90 or 60 to 90. So what Iran has been doing all this time, they've been enriching uranium to 60% and just stockpiling. They're not using this for anything. They say they want to use it for civilian energy purposes, but they don't actually use it for that. It's just like an argument to seem good to the world, but that's not what they actually do.
But also curbs on supporting militias in the Middle East that promote violence and instability. Iranians would benefit greatly if their government had to focus on bolstering its own people rather than its revolutionary credentials. The crucial issue will be uranium enrichment. Iran, based on the Non-Proliferation Treaty, says it has a right to enrichment for peaceful purposes. Israel wants them to have no enrichment whatsoever. The Trump administration had initially proposed a regional consortium that could enrich uranium while being monitored and provide Iranians with the uranium that is too low grade to be used for weapons. But once Trump saw the success of Israel's attacks on Iran, he decided to harden his position. He should consider going back to his previous stand.
Again, it's the Iranians who did not want the consortium. It's not that Trump wasn't offering that. And I'm pretty sure that's still being offered. It's the Iranian who are being problematic. This is someone who doesn't agree. I'm not one of those people who agrees with Trump with everything he does. A lot of Ukraine stuff, it's like Trump's probably not doing what's good for America. That's my opinion. But with Iran, I feel like Trump wasn't the problem. It was the Iranians.
Most experts I've consulted say that the regional consortium would be workable and safe. Diplomacy that ended with a deal would have another major advantage. Whatever one speculates about Iran's future intentions, it did not have a weaponized nuclear program. U.S. intelligence has been clear on this time and again, and I've seen no contrary evidence.
This could be like, this has happened to me where I say something, but the editor puts something entirely different on the screen. Maybe that's what happened. Because I actually pulled up this article and I read it. And the article is basically, they asked two people in the U.S. intelligence. One person said, hey, they're 2 years, 3 years away from the nuclear weapons. That's the intelligence person. And another person said, hey, Iran could have a bomb today if they wanted to. They have everything they need. They can build a bomb today, which is probably an over exaggeration, but they could probably build a bomb in like 10 days. They just need to get 60% enrichment to 90%. Now, they don't have the centrifuges right now to do that, but if they wanted to before, they could have done that in 10 days. So they asked two people, they gave two different answers, and one answer became the headline. That's exactly what happened.
So the U.S. launched an unprovoked attack against a sovereign state without UN or even congressional sanction. That kind of unilateral military action should not be undertaken lightly. It's easy to cheer when Washington does it, but how will we feel when China does it? How do we feel about Russia doing just that in Ukraine? The rules-based international order is a mouthful, a strange abstraction that most people never think about. But we are living...
Now, this is a point that's very interesting. This is why I watch for Zakaria a lot. I haven't really thought much about this. That's like an interesting point. It's like what US did. What if other countries do that, like China or Russia? Well, how would we react? Because we can call it what it is. China and Russia haven't reacted, but US would probably react if China or Russia do something like this.
Longest period of peace and stability in modern history among the world's major countries. That peace is what has allowed for the building of a global economy, of trade and travel, and a world in which nationalistic rivalries do not end up in a nuclear war. Military action against Iran, even though it was unprovoked and unilateral, could be justified if it leads to a strengthening of nuclear non-proliferation, a warning to those who might cross the line. But that requires a political settlement of the issue.
Which that's what Trump is aiming for. And another part people don't understand is Iran was trying to do stuff that North Korea did. They were trying to become North Korea 2.0. And the world kind of did make a mistake with North Korea where they were able to get the nuclear weapons. I don't know too much about how they got it. I had studied North Korea. It's just an interesting country to study, but there's just so much to read, right? But that's another reason why it could be why we are reacting so quickly and so decisively is we don't want another North Korea to happen, because then the dominoes start falling. A lot more dictators will start wanting nuclear weapons. Africa is a very unstable continent, especially that Sahel region. People will start eyeing for nuclear weapons there too, because if we don't stop countries, it will just become like very insane. Like just reading about nukes, it is impressive how after like 1965 or something, we really haven't had that many countries get nukes except like 2, 3, Pakistan, North Korea. Who else got it after 1965, 70s? Maybe India too. I think they got it in the 70s. But that's pretty impressive that we were able to kind of stop this, like countries just joining the nuclear club.
Issue in a way that is stable and acceptable to both sides, or else we merely have a ceasefire. And America's unilateral military attacks could push further the emerging chaos of international life, in which other powerful states also decide to break the rules, always for what they believe are good and urgent reasons. They will all justify their actions by saying what the soldier in Vietnam said, standing amidst smoldering ruins, that in order to save the village, he had to destroy it. Here at the Aspen Ideas Festival, I sat down with a man who managed these problems for the last administration, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor under President Biden.
Jake Sullivan, pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
What was your reaction to Donald Trump deciding to use American military power in the way he did over the last few days?
My main reaction coming out of these strikes is the question that gets asked so often in foreign policy. Okay, then what? And the then what for me is that sitting here today, after American military pilots conducted an operation with skill and effectiveness, we still need a deal. Because Iran still has, it appears, stockpiles of enriched uranium, still has centrifuge capacity, even if the installed centrifuge capacity has been destroyed or damaged or who knows what, and still has know-how, and therefore still has the possibility of reconstituting its program. And let me add also, Iran right now is not allowing the International Atomic Energy Agency to go to any of these sites. So the verification we had before, or we'd have under a deal, we don't currently have.
Wouldn't it be fair to say that we were all surprised by how weak Iran and its proxies were?
You know, one thing that I've reflected.
Same thing with Russia, which Sullivan was managing when Russia started the invasion. I think Sullivan was the main guy who really overestimated how powerful Russia was.
Over the course of my 4 years as National Security Advisor, is there's been more than one instance where I think we've overestimated the military capacity of our adversaries.
Soviet Union, Saddam Hussein.
Russia,
Right.
just before Ukraine. Right? We thought Kyiv had fallen a week because of the Russian military juggernaut, and Russia was exposed as having basically a corrupt and ineffectual army. And yes, I think
It's crazy. As I'm recording this, Putin just arrested some general in Russia for corruption. That's the problem with like a structure like Russia or China, where everyone's corrupt, but whenever they need a fall guy, they can always find someone because everyone's breaking the rule, including Putin. He's corrupt too. Very poor family, and now he has multiple billion-dollar houses.
view from across the professional class of national security decision makers, including intelligence and uniformed military professionals, was that Iran and its proxies had more juice than it turns out that they had.
So let me ask you very simply, on the basis of having looked at this intelligence very carefully over the last 4 years, could Iran build nuclear weapons on a relatively fast timeline underground over the next year?
So I'm going to start with the caveat, because any good intelligence person will always start with the caveat. And my caveat is that we still need to get the full battle damage assessment of what happened. And we need it to be unfiltered from political interference. We just need the straight dope from the American intelligence community and, frankly, from the Israeli intelligence community. But based on what I've seen so far, it is probable that Iran still retains on its territory some stockpiles of enriched uranium, still retains centrifuges and the capacity to build more of them. Much of that was destroyed, but probably not all of it, and still retains the know-how. So if they woke up tomorrow and said, we are going for it, it's not implausible to me that a crash military program could be conducted in as little as a year. I've heard from some Israelis who say 2 or 3 years. You saw this one DAA report that said as short as 6 months. But it's going to be in that zone if they went for it.